Hi, everybody. So we are continuing on with reading The Giver. Um, there's something I would like to address before we get into the story, though. Actually, I guess two things. So the first thing is obviously I understand that you all are not exactly happy with the way that we are reading the book right now, and I get that. Trust me, I'm not happy with it either. This is it's not ideal. I would much rather be reading the book with you all in person and actually having a discussion rather than it being one sided. But this is the best I can do for right now, given the circumstances. So we're all just going to have to get over it and move on. Um, and the second thing that I would like to address is the comments I get on my YouTube videos and YouTube channel. Um, First of all, I made the YouTube channel and videos solely so that the online students could have a way of learning the lessons and listening to lectures and stuff like that without having to be originally on a Zoom call the whole class period and it be really terrible and weird. Now, obviously, I'm using these videos in place of me being there in person. And with that being said, the YouTube videos are not another channel for you to make comments on. In fact, I already get a million emails a day. I do not need another million because you all decided that you wanted to comment on the YouTube channels. So please stop commenting on the YouTube videos. I would really appreciate it. Okay, so we left off starting at chapter 3, and we covered in chapter 2 basically Jonas's feelings about the December ceremony. We get some background or more background information about how things work in the community as far as job assignments go, expectations with that, um, and Jonas's fear with becoming an adult. So we're going to start at chapter 3. It should be universal across the board as far as picking up and ending. So if you are following along in the book, find chapter 3 in the book. If you are following along in the PDF, we're on page 13, chapter 3. All right, let's get started. Oh, look, Lily squealed in delight. Isn't he cute? Look how tiny he is. And he has funny eyes like yours, Jonas. Jonas glared at her. He didn't like it that she had mentioned his eyes. He waited for his father to chastise Lily, but father was busy unstrapping the carrying basket from the back of his bicycle. Jonas walked over to look. It was the first thing Jonas noticed as he looked at the new child, peering up curiously from the basket. The pale eyes. Almost every citizen in the community had dark eyes. His parents did, and Lily did, and so did all of his group members and friends. But there were a few exceptions. Jonas himself and a female of 5 who he had noticed had the different, lighter eyes. No one mentioned such things. It was not a rule, but was considered rude to call attention to things that were unsettling or different about individuals. Lily, he decided, would have to learn that soon, or she would be called in for chastisement because of her insensitive chatter. Father put his bike into its port. Then he picked up the basket and carried it into the house. Lily followed behind, but she glanced back over her shoulder at Jonas and teased, "Maybe he had the same birth mother as you." Jonas shrugged. He followed them inside, but he had been startled by the new child's eyes. Mirrors were rare in the community. They weren't forbidden, but there was no real need of them. And Jonas had simply never bothered to look at himself very often, even though he found himself in a location where a mirror existed. Now, seeing the new child in its expression, he was reminded that the light eyes were not only a rarity, but gave the one who had them a certain look. What was it? Depth, he decided, as if one were looking into a clear water of the river, down to the bottom where things might lurk which hadn't been discovered yet. He felt self-conscious, realizing that he too had that look. Okay, so immediately we're being introduced to the new child that Jonas's father had expressed those concerns about at the very beginning of the book. The one that wasn't growing fast enough, that might be released if Jonas's father can't help the baby. And they immediately talk about the baby's eyes and how they are the same as Jonas's. So one of the things that we talked about in that introduction PowerPoint that I showed you before we started reading over The Giver, we talked about foreshadowing. and how foreshadowing is those big hints that the author leaves to something that's going to happen later in the book. And the pale eyes are, in fact, a hint. And I want you to either mark that down or just make note of it in the back of your brain. But I told you the last time we read that the reference to the receiver was a was foreshadowing, and now the pale eyes are also foreshadowing. So just keep those in the back of your head. Okay. And going back to the idea of having the same birth mother, which is definitely a possibility, right? But again, this is Lily being 7 and not having a filter, and that's just proof of it. But usually, it's not polite, quote unquote, to mention birth mothers or the differences, as Jonas said, between people. He went to his desk, pretending not to be interested in the new child. On the other side of the room, Mother and Lily were bending over to watch as Father unwrapped its blanket. "What's his comfort object called?" Lily asked, picking up the stuffed creature which had been placed beside the new child in his basket. Father glanced at it. "Hippo," he said. Lily giggled the strange word. "Hippo." Lily giggled at the strange word. "Hippo," she repeated, and put the comfort object down again. She peered at the unwrapped child, now who waved his arms. "I think new children are so cute," Lily sighed. "I hope I get assigned to be a birth mother." "Lily," Mother spoke very sharply, "don't say that. There is very little honor in that assignment." "But I was talking to Natasha. You know, the 10 who lives around the corner. She does some of her volunteer hours at the birthing center, and she told me that birth mothers get wonderful food, and they have very gentle exercise periods, and most of the time they just play games and amuse themselves while they're waiting. I think I'd like that," Lily said petulantly. 3 years, Mother told her firmly. 3 births, and that's all. After that, they are laborers for the rest of their adult lives, until the day they enter the house of the old. Is that what you want, Lily? 3 lazy years, and then hard physical labor until you're old? Well, no, I guess not, Lily acknowledged reluctantly. Father turned the new child onto his tummy in the basket. He sat beside it and rubbed its small back with a rhythmic motion. "Anyway, Lily Billy," he said affectionately, "the birth mothers never even get to see the new children. If you enjoy the little ones so much, you should hope for an assignment as nurturer. When you're 8 and start your volunteer hours, you can try some at the nurturing center," Mother suggested. All right, so I kind of already spoiled the birth mother idea for you, but I told you before that in the community there was a type of hierarchy, and we said a hierarchy is like if we were to look at like in a monarchy, the king's at the top, then you have the lords and the ladies, then you have like the peasants, the working class, and then you have the lowest of the low, which would be slaves, right? That's a hierarchy, the kind of that pyramid. It's the same kind of idea in the community. So there are jobs that are more respected. Like Jonas's dad is a nurturer. That's obviously a very important job. His mom works for the Department of Justice. That's another very important job. And then Lily mentions wanting to be a birth mother. And Lily and Jonas's mom is obviously not happy with that idea because it is very clear from the description that her mom gives her that birth mothers are very, very low on the hierarchy as far as being assigned to that job. You don't necessarily want to be a birth mother, right? Because again, those first 3 years might be really, really good, but after that, you have to work really hard in physical labor for the rest of your life. And so birth mothers are not seen as very high up. And we kind of get some background too on, how the babies are born in the community, so they take good care of them while they're still incubating, we'll say, for those 9 months, and then after that, they go to the nurturers, right? And then off to their new families. Okay. Yes, I think I will, Lily said. She knelt beside the basket. "What did you say his name is?" "Gabriel." "Hello, Gabriel," she said in a sing-song voice. Then she giggled. "Oops," she whispered. "I think he's asleep. I guess I better be quiet." Jonas turned to the school assignments on his desk. Some chance of that, he thought. Lily was never quiet. Probably she should hope for an assignment as speaker so that she could sit in the office with a microphone all day making announcements. He laughed silently to himself, picturing his sister droning on in that self-important voice that all the speakers seemed to develop, saying things like, "Attention! This is a reminder to females under 9 that hair ribbons are to be neatly tied at all times. He turned toward Lily and noticed to his satisfaction that her ribbons were, as usual, undone and dangling. There would be an announcement like that quite soon, he felt certain, and it would be directed mainly at Lily, though her name, of course, would not be mentioned. Everyone would know. Everyone had known, he remembered with humiliation, that the announcement, "Attention, this is a reminder to male 11s that objects are not to be removed from the recreation area and that snacks are to be eaten, not hoarded," had been specifically directed at him, the day last month that he had taken an apple home. No one had mentioned it, not even to his parents, because the public announcement had been sufficient to produce the appropriate remorse. He had, of course, disposed of the apple and made his apology to the recreation director the next morning before school. Jonas thought again about the incident. He was still bewildered by it, not by the announcement or the necessary apology. Those were standard procedures, and he had deserved them. But by the incident itself. He probably should have brought up his feelings of bewilderment that very evening when his family unit had shared his feelings of the day. But he had not been able to sort out and put to words the source of his confusion, so he had let it pass. It happened during the recreation period when he had been playing with Asher. Jonas had casually picked up an apple from the basket where the snacks were kept and had thrown it to his friend. Asher had thrown it back, and they had begun a simple game of catch. There had been nothing special about it. It was an activity that he had performed countless times. Throw, catch, throw, catch. It was effortless for Jonas, and even boring, though Asher enjoyed it, and playing catch was a required activity for Asher because it would improve his hand-eye coordination, which is not up to standards. But suddenly, Jonas had noticed, following the path of the apple through the air with his eyes, that a piece of the fruit had, this was the part that he couldn't adequately understand. The apple had changed, just for an instant. It had changed in mid-air, he remembered. Then it was in his hands, and he looked at it carefully. But it was the same apple, unchanged, the same size and shape, a perfect sphere, the same nondescript shade, but about the same shade as his own tunic. There was absolutely nothing remarkable about the apple. He had tossed it back and forth between his hands a few times, then thrown it again to Asher, and again, in the air, for an instant only, it had changed. Okay, so let's go back to talking about foreshadowing, okay? So this apple is another instance of foreshadowing. And in fact, I do want us to add this to our notes. So give me I have my notes pulled up right here. Okay, so really quick, I did add birth mother to the types of jobs that you could be assigned, because that is a job that you can get in the community, but not one that's very respected. And then again, talking about the foreshadowing. So I told you yesterday when we read that mentioning of the receiver and what his role was in the community, that was foreshadowing. And then we have Jonas's eyes and even Gabriel's eyes, right? Those are foreshadowing. And the changing apple is also foreshadowing. And I do want you to put these in your notes just so that you have reference to those, because we're going to continue to go back to these and they will be on the test. So make sure you have that written down. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of wrap things up here. Jonas had been completely mystified. Ash, he had called, does anything seem strange to you about the apple? Yes, Asher called back, laughing. It jumps out of my hand and onto the ground. Asher had just dropped it once again. So Jonas laughed too, and with his laughter tried to ignore his uneasy conviction that something had happened. But he had taken the apple home, against the recreation area rules, that evening before his parents and Lily arrived at the dwelling. He had held it in his hands and looked at it carefully. It was slightly bruised now, because Asher had dropped it several times, but there was nothing at all unusual about the apple. He had held a magnifying glass to it. He had tossed it several times across the room, watching, and then rolled it around and around on his desk, waiting for the thing to happen again. But it hadn't. The only thing that happened was the announcement later that evening over the speaker, the announcement that had singled him out without using his name, that had caused both of his parents to glance meaningfully at his desk where the apple still lay. All right, so we're starting to get a pretty clear picture, but we're going to stop there for today. Make sure you answer the questions, and if you have questions, let me know. Thanks, guys.